How do you want to start with this? Do you want to get into BYU Colorado? They're the ones that control their own destiny. BYU remains unbeaten. Colorado, because of another loss by Iowa State, they're alone in second place. How about Dion and the Buffaloes?
Yeah, they've rallied. They have one close loss to Kansas State and one ass whooping in Nebraska. And after that whooping to Nebraska, they did great. But the story of the Big 12 this week is BYU and Utah.
Yeah, and let's get to it. This is the Big 12 officiating when Mark Harlan went off. And here is the statement from the Big 12 about Mark Harlan, what he said. Mark's comments irresponsibly challenged the professionalism of our officials, the integrity of the Big 12 Conference. Unfortunately, Mark chose the wrong way. There's a right way and wrong way. Accordingly, this violation warrants both the public reprimand and a financial penalty. The Big 12 Conference prioritizes professionalism, integrity, and fairness, and will continue to do so. Also, notes from Pete Thamel on the fine of $40,000, more than the highest they've handed out in 10 years. We've seen Jamie Pollard, Iowa State, Mack Rhodes, Baylor, and Texas Tech's Kirby Hocutt. They all have been fined $25,000 apiece. Some, not just football, but also basketball. Craig, your thoughts about Mark Harlan, Utah, and, of course, the BYU game?
Yeah, the game. I mean, that's the real thing that's top of mind for me is the game itself. That was huge. That was the first Big 12 Holy War, and it was an incredible game as far as drama and stakes and things of that nature when it came to BYU's pursuit of the Big 12 title and also college football playoff berth and possible national championship, not getting too far ahead, but all those things still out there for them at this point. And, I can't help but be a little bit torn by that result because, let's just dive into it. Like, forget Mark Harlan for a second. I thought it was a bad call. I thought it was a bad holding call on Saturday night. I did not agree with it in the moment. I could not believe it, and then again I could when it occurred. And I'll say this. On the one hand, I've seen now everybody slow it down and show different camera angles and different types of, angles on the rule book and every which way you could seemingly divide this penalty. It's been looked at. And in the moment and still afterwards, I feel like it was a bad call. Now, maybe some of the explanation I can go like, okay, but in the moment I was like, that is a horrific call. I cannot believe they threw that flag. I still lean that way. So there is that part of it. But I don't think that, BYU doesn't deserve any credit whatsoever. BYU got the ball back. BYU drove down the field. Now, yes, that play gave them extra time, but as I've seen many BYU fans do, you can go, well, what about this face mask earlier in the game that led to a Utah score? And you can do that all day long. I thought that was a terrible call in the moment, but I do respect BYU's fight. I respect BYU's ability to win the close games, and they are on top of the Big 12 Conference. They went out and they took that game, given that ninth life that you don't always get, and sometimes when you do, you don't take advantage of it. But they got that extra opportunity, and they went and drove down the field and had a little help. But they executed when it mattered most, and they completely dominated Utah in terms of scoring in the second half. Like, Utah did not do anything offensively in the second half, and this is one of those games where you go, yeah, that call sucked, but if you did something like a field goal, just a field goal, get a safety, like something, then you win that game. So this is one of those, it's just the two sides are so heated, and it's such an emotional matchup that, you're not going to please everybody. But I did kind of find myself in the middle of, like, that was a bad call, but credit to BYU for going and sealing off that win when given their opportunity, because that's all you can go and do. But, yeah, it left a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth.
Yeah, I in the moment, I was watching it. I was awake because I was, partying. But I was actually awake and saw it. In real time, I thought, man, that's a hell of a moment to make that call. Number two, but when I got up in the morning and it saw Mark Harlan lose his mind, I went back and looked at it because, look, if he's right and he can be out there, like, for example, Mack Rhodes and Kelvin Sampson and all those guys who went at the basketball officials were right. They were right, so they had it. Mark Harlan was wrong, though, and when you're going to go do that, you've got to make sure that you're not wrong. And here's why he was wrong. There was something you could have called. There was a legit hold. He threw him off his route. The official is right there. He saw it. He called it.
Yeah.
Now, there's no whistle swallowing metric. So I get, like, in those situations sometimes, especially with a hold, and those things can be really subjective, all that. But the guy saw it, so him getting mad about that call. Here's the other thing. It wasn't the hold, then the next play was the field goal. It's not like the hold put them right in field goal range. Yeah. They had a few plays between the hold and then to stop them.
Well, they had a big throw down the middle of the field that really kind of put them in position.
But even still,
but they could
stop them.
Yeah, get a sack again.
Or score at some point in the second half.
21, you got outscored completely, shut out in the second half. Here's Mark Harlan on the post game, and we're going to get to the game. We're going to bounce back and forth with this. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I recognize that there are more appropriate times and avenues to express those concerns, I accept the consequences of my decision. The University of Utah is proud to be a member of the Big 12 Conference and look forward to working with our peers to continue enhancing the league. Let me tell you what I thought. So I watched Texas Tech, Colorado, and that game took forever. I even made a comment about that on Twitter. I didn't complain about any of the calls. I did see that when they replayed and reviewed the targeting call against Colorado, then they wiped that out that there was. And I saw it even when it was live, the face mask call. So we could go down this thing all day long, but there are times during the game you could also make plays. Mark Harlan, he has been reprimanded. BYU, they win. It's not going to be taken away from them. I hate when calls become the topic of the game. I understand that's going to happen. It's like Paxton said, refs could call holding on every play. No, they can't. This is a situationally bad call. Why? Because it's late in the game? I get that. Like, no harm, no foul in the NBA or anywhere at the end of the game. But Utah could have done something about this well before that drive. And it looked like they had with the sack of Retzloff near the goal line.
Well, that's the thing is, like, if you want to get into it, hey, make a play to win the game. They did.
Yeah.
They did make the play, and then the flag was thrown. So that's why if you're a Utah fan, it's not just as simple as like, well, you should have made a play. You did make the play, and that's when they called the penalty. So then, yeah, you make plays after that. But, like, that's the thing. So I'm not going to sit here and dwell on this result because, that we can't really afford to do that. I know Utah fans will, and I certainly understand that. But it is what it is, and as much of, like, that's not the phrase that you want to hear. It's true. Like, you can't sit there and go back and correct it now or change it. I think Utah fans had every right to be out of their minds on Saturday night. I think BYU fans and I guess everybody else in the Big 12 that now wants to pick on Utah had every right to poke fun at them and call them sore losers and everything else. Like, that's part of college football, but every fan base would have been irate with that, and everybody would have had the same result ultimately, which is, yeah, you should have done something else about it. You should have made a play after that. You should have scored at some point in the second half. Instead, you got blanked. And so that's just a really touchy outcome because it was so explosive and it looked like it was over and it looked like we had the big upset. And then you just get that flags on the field and then all of the subsequent discussion afterwards. So I think this is one of those, like, if you wanted Utah to win or whatever, like, you believe that call was as egregious as it possibly gets. If you didn't, then you think that was textbook passing or defensive holding. It's all in the eye of the beholder. So as somebody who really is somebody in the middle just watching that game, I think Utah had every right to be furious, but I also see the other side of it, especially the argument of, well, you should have done something about it afterwards. But, easy to say when you just had your heart ripped out and now, hey, go back and play defense after you just thought you won the game and started celebrating. So easier said than done, but I hate that it ended at such a great game with such a controversial ending. I hate that it was ugly instead of just like, damn, that was ugly in a good way. It ended up ugly in a bad way with the talk about it. And so I think that sucks because the one thing I was thinking throughout that game was what a hell of a rivalry the Big 12 now has.
Oh, God, yeah.
What a great uniform matchup. What great atmospheres in Provo and Salt Lake City. And what a great rivalry the Holy War can be alongside Baylor, TCU, and K-State, Kansas, and so on and so forth. So I think that's going to be a classic for years to come. I think Utah, given their deficiencies, played a pretty good game in a lot of ways, but they had too many things that they just weren't able to overcome offensively and sometimes even defensively. I mean, they gave us some big chunks in the pass game at a lot of wrong times, and especially late, and that ended up costing them for such a proud defense. But it was a hell of a game. Hats off to BYU. I mean, they're carrying the torch for the Big 12 right now. And I guess we just kind of got into Harlan's comments. We didn't talk about what he actually said, which was blistering and basically accusing the Big 12 of fixing the game.
It's in the rundown.
You're
talking about Harlan's audio?
Well, what he said, because you've already gone to his statement apologizing.
Well, because you start with what's now, and then you go back. Here's why he was fined and reprimanded, and this is also why he came out with a statement yesterday apologizing for what he said.
I've been an athletic director for 12 years. This game was absolutely stolen from us. We were excited about being in the Big 12, but tonight I am not. We won this game. Someone else stole it from us. Very disappointed. I will talk to the commissioner. This was not fair to our team. I'm disgusted by the professionalism of the officiating crew tonight. Thank you.
Now, also, one note about it, and he's emotional. Mac Rhodes did it after a basketball game. We've seen others. Jamie Pollard, we mentioned that. He's hot. One of the things that is not being talked about, and we can all disagree or agree, whether he was tugged, was it holding, was it whatever. Mark Harlan was on the field on the kickoff to end the game. Like, on the field and going after the officials. And I thought that might be even worse than what he said in the postgame. I've never had him on the show. We've never talked to him before. We've tried many times. Maybe we will one day. But, what's interesting? An AD never gets up after a game and gets into the press conference and says, man, BYU got screwed or K-State got screwed. We shouldn't accept. I get it. It's the emotions. Fans are the same way. Fans of Utah, none of them are going to agree. None of them are going to agree with the call. I get it. And every BYU fan is going to say, hey, whether they agree with the call or not, they got enough opportunity to continue the game. But that was Mark Harlan. He was pissed off, no question.
And I get it. But here's the other thing. And look, he's in the echo chamber. So when he's going, look, listen, I'm going to go say something. Nobody's going to stop him. But also, before you go in there and say it, make sure that there's nothing that's going to come back on you, like video of your guy actually doing it. Which, again, officiating calls are subjective. But if it was a legit bad call, now the timing of the call was certainly in question, but a bad call is one that shouldn't have been made in any circumstance. Well, that one, there was a circumstance.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not one that says, oh, well, it's the fourth quarter and it's a game where it's going to be decided on this drive. We can't throw that flag that we'd otherwise throw any other time in this game. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think anybody should advocate for that because that's BS. If it's a flag, it's a flag.
That's what I want to know from his perspective. Did you think it should have been a swallowed whistle? Because then swallowed whistles benefit you too, buddy.
Yeah, it does.
Or did you think it wasn't a penalty? If you think it wasn't a penalty, that's fine. But did you think it wasn't a penalty because you were watching it from field level and maybe your angle wasn't great? The guy who threw the flag was right in front of it. So, again, sometimes this also will lead into my soapbox of this is why officials need to be available to answer questions.
I was going to get to that. I agree.
Defend themselves or to explain themselves. And we have the technology. Smokey, I could bring an official in, put up on the screen the review, and go, okay, we have some questions about this play right here. Tell me why you made this call or missed this call. Have them be accountable and move the hell on.
Or have a poll reporter for the official, whoever that might be.
I mean,
like they do in the NFL,
Yeah, I mean, as far as that goes, we saw questionable calls in Texas Tech and Colorado. Saw questionable calls in a whole sequence in Baylor TCU the week prior. I mean, we could probably point out a game in every single slate, every single weekend. We'll hear the pity party that sometimes officials give of like, well, you don't understand how hard the job is and all this and that. And I get it. Like, you're traveling and you've got hostile crowds. I think there's also some benefits. It's kind of why you do it. It's not just for the love of the game, especially at that level. So I think there does need to be a give and a take of, you don't want these guys getting death threats, but at the same time, like there does need, especially in this gambling era, there needs to be some level of accountability. I don't think these guys should just be able to anonymously go from game to game, affecting outcomes that affect entire playoff brackets and millions upon millions of dollars, and they just don't have to ever defend their decisions. I think that's completely cowardice. And so if that means putting professional officials in a situation where that becomes a part of the package you arrange the next time you meet, to decide what the agreement looks like, that's something I think you have to do. If you want to be a professional sports league, which is basically what the top of the college sports ladder is going towards, then officiating needs to be better than it has been. And certainly there's cases every single Saturday, Thursday, Friday, et cetera, as I mentioned. As far as Mark Harlan goes, I appreciate his passion, but that was too much in the heat of the game. So I understand that he's probably a little over his skis, but I would be too in that situation. I just think as an athletic director, you have to be smart enough to know, especially if you're going to start accusing people of a lack of professionalism, hello. So that was interesting, but I get he was just totally caught up in emotions. But you have to be the more mature person and understand, in your role, you can't be that guy. Or at least you can't word it the way that you worded it, which was basically you thought Texas Tech was accusing people of cheating. Just wait till what I say at the podium after this, where your officials are unprofessional and this and that and this and that. You took this game from us and this and everything else that he had to say. So, I get him defending, but I think that ultimately the volume needs to be turned down on Utah and the Big 12. This is a toxic relationship so far. So I don't know if something needs to change in the AD's office or the two sides need to come together. But this whole we've never wanted to be a part of you, and now we're calling you out when we lose this big game.
He actually said he was excited about joining the Big 12, which I don't know if that's really true.
Well, yeah, we also know everything he said leading into that, which was complete opposite. Yeah. So. Saying that the rumors about them joining were false.
He wasn't the only one.
No, he wasn't the only one, but he's the one that's sitting there calling out the Big 12 right now. Yep. So I do think there's this toxicity between the Utah side and the Big 12 side. Maybe not in the offices, but certainly that's the perception. And I don't think that speaks for every Utah fan. It's just the very loudest ones and some of their administration that sort of created that. And I think that's a real shame because we already kind of saw that with Oklahoma and Texas, the superiority. They have more reasons to feel that way than Utah ever did walking in day one. And so it already got off to kind of a bad start, and it just doesn't feel like a great fit. And I think that has as much to do with Utah in some cases as it does the other side. But I just wish it was a little bit more, like everybody else for that matter, instead of the one-source school that just seems like the spoiled child that doesn't want to be here and is complaining about it the entire way.
Well, look, it wouldn't hurt if they started winning games.
Oh, that would help a lot.
He wouldn't be as upset if they were 7-2, although he'd be upset losing to BYU in the call. I thought it was a tug. There's no question there was a yank.
Yeah.
Now, whether there should have been a flag or not, I'm not going to get into that because I have but it was a yank. And I don't know when the flag was thrown. Was it after the sack? Was it during the play? I don't know. I don't have enough video. I do say this in my games and among others, and then we can move on to some other things as well. But I know that a lot of you in the chat room have your opinions too, and we appreciate those. You guys can talk along. Guys and girls can talk about that. Officials have got to stop being babied. I understand it's a hard job. You took the damn job. I understand you also get a paycheck. I also understand that it's a pretty good paycheck. Is it worth being like what happened with Huggins from the Big 12, Paul? Basketball official eventually just he was getting death threats.
Higgins.
I understand that part.
Higgins.
Excuse me.
Higgins, yeah.
Baylor fans will hate him until the day he passes away. It's come on. But there should be at least statements from the Big 12. They're not going to sit there and put out a statement about that call. They're not going to, because they could put out 300 or 150 plays a game. But I do think officials, if they have had just a really, really bad day or 2 or 3 in a row of games, they should also, if they do get suspended, we should know about it. Now, here's Cody Campbell, a border region at Texas Tech. After the game and the loss to Colorado, it had to be excruciating for the Red Raiders again at home. That was awful officiating. No excuses made because we didn't play well, but the Big 12 Conference crew should be better than that. There were a lot. Joey in the postgame mentioned that there would be 4 or 5 replays of not just face masks, but other calls. They will send that in. Texas Tech had the game perfectly the way they wanted. Colorado weathered the storm and then came back eventually and won the game to get to now, 7-2 on the year. I was texting back and forth with Kim Coulter, huge Texas Tech. We know he's a massive alum, is that every game. I just said, I just don't think Cody Campbell needs to be the one saying that. And he said, why? Because he's a Board of Regent, because of some sort of like unwritten rule? I just think that needs to come from Kirby Hocutt or maybe Joey McGuire, who was outspoken in many ways in the postgame.
Yeah, I haven't really given that much thought. I mean, I've never been big on just hearing from boosters anyways, so I didn't want to hear from John Ruiz and LifeWall at Miami. I don't care to know these people. I mean, honestly, I really don't. We already have the ADs, the presidents, the coaches, the players, all these personalities. But every school's got their guys, and so for Texas Tech, he's obviously a big voice, and if they enjoy hearing from him, then so be it. I mean, I could give or take it. He's been on this show. We appreciate what he does and his contributions and his time that he gave to us, but I'm not planning, for me at least, on making what Cody Campbell has to say as like a weekly part of my Texas Tech diagnosis. You know, I'm going to listen to Joey McGuire, and I guess Kirby Hocutt if he has something to say. If everybody else wants to listen to Cody Campbell and follow his lead, that's fine. I mean, he's the guy that's signing the checks and making a lot of this happen, so his voice matters. But for me, I'm not a Texas Tech guy, so I could take it or leave it. Like, I don't need to hear from Colorado's biggest booster. I don't need to hear from Baylor's biggest booster. Mm-hmm. I don't even know who these people are in most cases. I don't know who UCF's biggest booster is, or Utah's for that matter. I mean, ultimately, they're just fans with much bigger pocketbooks and a lot more influence. But, I mean, I can certainly understand his frustration, and I'm certain that a lot of Texas Tech fans probably enjoyed hearing him with the voice that he has, being as loud as he is, much like with what would you even refer to that? The allegations of the headsets, you know.
Yeah, with the emoji of the bulging eyes.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how,
yeah.
I was going to say like sign, but it's not that. It's whatever you want to refer to that whole incident as a couple of weeks ago with the headsets. But, you know, he was kind of stoking the fire there. So he has his place, but I just don't think it needs to mean that we all like take what he has to say into account every week because he's some big booster. But, yeah, I can understand his frustrations because that roughing the passer in particular, was a very questionable call. Mm-hmm. Now, if you want to go just like with the holding call and say, like, slow it down and look at it from this angle and then slow it down more, and then you see, so you could do that and say, oh, well, Shador's knees were in trouble, and so that's why they throw it.
I thought that call, though, that call on roughing the passer against Texas Tech created 2 or 3 other roughing the passer calls.
It did.
Now, in the replay of targeting, and I texted, again, Kim on this, and he said, no, he led with the helmet. Then he watched it. He said, no, you're right. It was not targeting. However, in the early part of that play, there was an obvious face mask call that was not called. So then, but again,
well, and then you get into every play. There's a hold, and so that's why I don't want to go down that road. But there were a couple big calls this weekend that clearly had impacts on games. But there's also moments.
There also was a 4th down fake punt that was a disaster.
Right. Well, let me finish that. Yeah, there's also moments where you didn't get the call, but then you went and you had opportunities to make plays, and like the 4th down punt call, you didn't execute. Or like Utah, you had an entire second half to score a single point, and you couldn't do that. So. Yeah, the officiating needs to get better, but teams also can be better in their execution, and that would also change the outcome in a lot of cases.
All right, there's a few more things to get to. Ken Nia Matalolo from San Jose State. This was the weekend I did. How proud of you and me. Phonetics writing it out that way. Plus, I just like the guy. Mountain West issues, public reprimand. San Jose State. I think they play Boise next. Ken Nia Matalolo, in his response to public criticism of game officials following the win against Oregon State. So there's another one that went down. One quick note.
He's complaining after a win.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. According to Dave Aranda earlier today, that Dominic Richardson, the transfer from Oklahoma State, hasn't played much. Didn't really play a lot last year. I guess he did a lot more. It's going to make he's taking that extra year so he can go somewhere else next year. Aranda wished him well and wished that his career will find a chance to be the alpha.
Yeah, need to say before we move on, and I talk about that, through all of the officiating noise, congratulations, BYU. I said it at the beginning, but congratulations on remaining undefeated, and also to Colorado. I mean, they're in second place by themselves. They're in control of their own destiny. That was a big win to go to Lubbock and defeat a pretty good Red Raiders squad, so We can argue about this and that, but, I mean, ultimately those teams won, and those two teams are on a collision course to Arlington as it stands right now. That's your Big 12 championship game. It's Colorado versus BYU with 3 weeks to play. So those were controversial moments in those games, but those were big games and big wins by those two, and that's what we need to acknowledge before we move on here. So having done that, we'll see if that gets tested and somebody else jumps into the fray, which I imagine they will in these next 3 weeks. But Dominic Richardson was hardly playing. He was a non-factor in terms of their rotation at this point. And so having only played in 4 games, I think if you've got a year to go out there and try to give it one more go, it only makes sense if that's, what you're trying to do is continue playing football. So sorry that it didn't work out better here in a couple of years of play, or I guess less than 2 years. But, yeah, I totally get his decision, and I get that there's not really room for him right now.
Yeah, Pendergrass and Washington have become dominant over a couple games. And then even though, Richard Reese hasn't been much of anything this year, but they've got 2 guys, and then they have others that are waiting in the wings. And both those guys, Pendergrass and Washington, will be back next year, so that there's not a lot of room for him to move up.
Yeah, they got the young kid, I think, from Oklahoma coming in who's a pretty good player, too. Let me get to something that here's an example. Tyler Stout. This is why, at least me, yes, there are calls, and then I hope we can go on to what else is going on in college football. There was also a face mask called against BYU, but the replay showed no face mask. There was review. Utah scored on that. See, we could go through that on every play. I get it. All you have to admit, everybody, if your team has benefited from a call that's helped them win a game, there's nothing wrong with saying, hey, we got lucky, and you won the game and enjoy it. And so we move on from that. The AP Top 25 poll. Here we are. It shook up a little bit. BYU's up to 7. There's Texas. They looked really good against Florida. Looked like they got rested, decompressed, and relaxed. Iowa, now with 10 wins for the first time ever. Alabama jumps up after throttling Garrett Ross and his Go Tigers.
That was a terrible game.
That was just brutal. There's
you
Ole
don't
Miss.
even know what a terrible game is.
Yeah, well, we'll get to you in a minute.
You don't even know what a terrible game is.
Yeah, none of you guys know what a terrible game is.
Yeah,
all of our favorite teams suck.
Not as bad as the one on Saturday.
Ole Miss, of course, just jumped on Georgia even after giving up an early pick and then a touchdown. Georgia offense is sick. And if you really think about it, when they dominated Texas in the first half in Austin, they had a lot of short fields. But Carson Beck, what in the world's going on? And it might not be him. Maybe it's the offensive line or protection or receivers or whatever. They look really, really bad. But they, of course, aren't going to drop too far. They're number 11. Boise at 12 and SMU, a couple of new teams, not in the top 25, but what they're doing. Colorado bumps up to 18. K-State still inside of it. Iowa State gone. Back-to-back losses. They are done. They still have a chance, though, to get in to the Big 12 championship game. Now, here's Ole Miss after the game an hour or so later. Molly McGrath, the sideline reporter, with a picture of the goalpost in the middle of the square on campus at Ole Miss.
You know what? I congratulate them for tearing it down, but just to the middle of the square, Vanderbilt went all the way down Broadway. Maybe the Vanderbilt kids weren't as drunk as the kids in the Grove. Maybe that's true. Maybe you only got to the middle of campus because that was all you could go. But hey, it's got to be dumped into a river or something, so somebody has to dive in and saw it off. Ole Miss, you could have gone a little further.
I don't know what the closest river is. It may be the Mississippi. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. Here's a note about Ole Miss's win against Georgia. CBS Sports with this one. Snaps a 52-game win streak by Georgia. 52-game win streak by Georgia against non-Alabama teams. Second win for Ole Miss against an AP top 2 team in history. There aren't a lot. A lot of schools don't have a lot of those. And Ole Miss has won 8+ games now for 4 consecutive years for the first time since the early 1960s.
And it's the biggest win of Lane Kiffin's tenure there. It's the first time that they've been able to get over the hump against the Georgia and Alabama or someone like that when it mattered into the postseason or has postseason implications. And the world was kind of ready to write off Ole Miss after the losses they had, but now they're right back in it. So good for them.
They got and then they had, of course, Jackson Dart, who came back in. He was out for a little bit. Looked like, oh my God, they're going to get down 20, and they came back to win that game. Either one of you want to say a couple of things quickly about the top 25?
Yeah, I mean, BYU is just not getting any benefit of the doubt. They just have to keep winning. It's like what we said last week. I'm sure there will be some stink raised for better or worse about where they land tomorrow night. That's really all that matters, not the AP poll or even the coaches poll at this point, but I'm very intrigued to see where they land. They won again. They're 9-0. But I can see where some that weren't believers before, like, oh, well, you struggled to beat Utah and it took you to the end of the game. Like, that's how some people will probably look at it. There's others who be like, damn, it's time to start giving them a little bit more respect. I don't think they're 2 or 3 spots worse than Indiana. I think Indiana's had a pretty easy schedule, but fortunately we're going to see them get tested here pretty soon in a very major way. But I think BYU is sitting about as high as they can to where a point where, like, eventually they're going to be 10-0 possibly, and you're going to have to say, like, all right, guys, like, when are we going to start bumping them up a little bit? But I get, like, you don't think they're better than Oregon or Ohio State or Penn State or Tennessee or whatever, but you're kind of running out of teams in front of them at this point when you start getting to 9-0 and possibly 10, 11, 12-0. Like, ultimately something's going to have to give there. So that's what stands out to me is BYU just hanging around there in the top, but not quite getting that top 5 love just yet. And, Iowa State now barely hanging on. I was very interesting to see Miami go down this weekend. I mean, that obviously shook things up in a major way in the ACC. That was a huge loss for Cam Ward and the Canes. They're not out of the playoff, but that shakes it up immensely to where they're now hanging on the back end of the playoff, and their ACC hopes are a little bit more in doubt. And so now that makes that a very interesting race along with SMU out there. In terms of, Clemson as well, about who could possibly make it from the ACC. So, yeah, that was a big Miami loss that shakes up not just the ACC, but also the playoff structure because they were sitting there right near the top last week.
Yeah, let me ask you this. Of the teams that Miami could potentially play in a playoff, at least right behind them or above them, and they could have to play SMU in the title game. That's how it would stand right now. Can SMU run the ball? Yep.
Yeah.
Can Boise State run the ball?
Yeah, a little bit.
A little bit. Okay. Georgia maybe not right now. Can Ole Miss run the ball? Yeah, they can. Yeah. Can Bama run the ball? Yeah, they can. Can Notre Dame run the ball? It's pretty much all they do. Can BYU run the ball? Yes. Can Tennessee? Yes. Can Indiana? Yes. Can Penn State? Yes. Can Texas? Yes. Can Ohio State? Yes. Can Oregon?
Now, not
yes.
all of those. Now, there's some that aren't great at running the
ball. BYU's not great at running the football.
Okay, yeah. But
in Texas, of course, we had those 2 5-stars.
BYU's gotten better with L.J. Martin getting healthy, and Jake Retzloff can break off a run here and there, but I wouldn't call him like a great running team.
Okay, your point is they're going to face somebody.
Their defense has not been playing well for a while. They've been playing fast and loose, and Georgia Tech kind of owns them right now. After last year and this year, they won that game with Haynes King and able to throw, and a true freshman back there that came in to run some plays and then throw passes when they needed to. That's how they won the game, going right at Miami. And that's scary when you get down into this part of the postseason where they may very well make the playoff, but they're not going to play teams that can't really run the ball, at least to somewhat of effective level.
All right, Ari Temkin is just around the corner. I did not know this until today, and apparently neither did Kirby Smart. Jake Pope, a player on the Georgia football team who was with some friends who he's known since he was a child, celebrating the win for Ole Miss, and there's video of him jumping around and acting excited. Kirby Smart was asked about it. Do we have the audio of this?
No.
Or just, okay.
No, just this.
Kirby Smart was asked about this today. He goes, about the viral video, what an idiot, just stupid. But to be honest with you, I don't really have time to waste on that. My focus is on Tennessee. Georgia has 2 losses, and they could be protected or whatever for so long. Eventually, they got to win out, or they're not going to be a part of the college football playoff unless they somehow win the SEC. Alabama, you would think, is the same way with the 2 losses, and they, again, just neutered LSU, and Milroe was fantastic in that game. But how about a player on the Georgia football team jumping around excited with friends of his who are at Ole Miss?
Buddy, not your best move. Wait till later. I get it. Like, I get you're happy for your friend, but clearly you're not all that invested in being a Georgia Bulldog.
Well, I mean, guys, he had like a whole note he sent out, and he said that he unexpectedly came across some family and friends, and that it wasn't even so much he was celebrating. I mean, you can believe what you want to on it, but he said in his own words that he came across them unexpectedly, and it was not excitement that they lost or that the other team won. Ole Miss, it was excitement to see those people. So that's what he says.
Well,
I
yeah.
have no reason to – I mean, I don't know the guy, so I'm not going to call him a liar, and I'm not, like, psychotic enough about the SEC that I'm, like, want to – take him off the team. But I think Kirby Smart's reaction to it was pretty funny, and I think he learned a valuable lesson about the camera's always on. And I don't think it's, an indictment against the kid or anything, but it does make for a funny moment, especially if you don't take into consideration his reasoning why. But, yeah, that was not a great look.